therefore, to welcome two experts this evening. We have Dr. Tim Longmore and Professor Dr. Chris Longmore and Professor Tim Perfect. You can see that my facial recognition is already going wrong. Who are going to contribute to this evening's talk. And they are going to show that, in fact, our understanding of human memory does have practical implications. And one of those practical implications has to do with our criminal justice system. And I wonder, at the end of this evening, whether you will be less sure that we have a good criminal justice system than you thought before. So I'm actually asking you, at the end of this series, remember what happens in these COG talks. I ask our two speakers to speak each for 15 minutes, and then it's over to you. So don't forget that the audience participation is very important. So, Chris, can you start the ball rolling by explaining to us how it is that we perceive faces, and why it is that we sometimes think that we are good at perceiving faces. Chris.
This one.
So can you all hear me? Okay? I feel like I just stand up or something. I won't start singing, that's just a bad joke. When Tim asked me would I get involved in doing this session, it reminded me of a chat I was having at a conference some years ago about face recognition and about a particular story about some old professors at a certain university. And the story goes like this. Apologies to the original author if I'm paraphrasing a bit, it's a fair few years ago now. The story goes that four old professors, on a nice hot summer's day, think, let's go and take a dip in the river, go for a quick swim. One of the professors points out, we don't have any swim gear with us. What are we going to do? The other one says, oh, it doesn't matter about that, we'll just jump in, you know what I mean? Nobody's going to notice, nobody's going to see us around here. So then they go down to the river, jump in, do a bit of skinny dipping, swim around for a little bit. And just as about to finish their swimming, they're coming back to the place where they've left their clothes, and they suddenly see a group of young undergraduates walking past. They start thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? Quick, get out, get out! So they run out of the river. Three of them grab their towels and wrap them around their waist, while the last guy just wraps it around his head. These students look at him, and they just eventually go away, and they take the towels away. It's like, the other three are going, what on earth are you doing? Putting the towel around your head. To which this guy just replies, well, I don't know how you're recognised around here. But I think it kind of neatly demonstrates that we do have some ideas about how we process faces, and that we do see faces all the time. And we actually start to think that we're either very, very good with faces or very, very poor with faces. The strange thing is, actually, when we look at the research, people are actually quite consistent most of the time. And at times we can be really, really very good with faces. So let's start off by dragging Michael back up, actually, for a nice little demonstration of a well-known particular illusion, which some people have seen before. Which is known as the hollow face illusion. It tells us a little bit about how we like to perceive the world around us. For this one, I've got to put the microphone down, so I'm trying to talk a little bit louder if possible. Yeah, hold on to that, yeah. So basically, what we've got here, both Tim's going to do it at the front, Michael's going to be a bit further back. If you have a look at this thing that's in front of you, what people tend to start seeing here is a regular, normal face. And when the guys start to rotate it ever so slightly, you might start to get something a bit weird, but the face seems to start to follow you. If you rotate it back round the other way, the face is also following you. Now if you speed up a little bit and just rotate it all the way around, you'll see that you're actually fooled all the time. You're actually looking at the mask on the inside of the mask. You weren't actually looking at the outside of the face. If you slightly rotate it now, you actually see the face no longer follows you. Basically, I'm getting the illusion from this side. Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks very much, Michael. It neatly demonstrates just how tuned we are to seeing faces in the world around us. Oh, got a cat's phone. For those that know me, know that I actually started out looking at cat face recognition, but probably best not talk about that today. But we do like to perceive faces all around us all the time. Thinking about the professor's story, there are certain situations where if you're worried about the police trying to find you, you want to make sure that you're of a particular group that are not going to be recognised well by people. As you see from the hollow faces, we're quite attuned to looking at these particular stimuli. So this is a bit of a news story from yesterday, that police are looking for a horse after hay and carrot thefts. Later down the story, it does actually say, certain constable says, we're probably looking for a horse, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. Needless to say, I think the horse is going to do okay actually getting away with this one. I don't think he's going to be shocked by anybody, and I think actually the police might have great difficulty identifying him. But we do seem to see faces all the time, as I say. Can we see the face in that one? Often known as the Jesus in Marmite. For those that haven't quite grasped, there's the eyes up there, the nose, and the mouth down here. Now, the one question I cannot answer for you today is, why is it always Jesus? I do not know. Because after all, what do you do with the Jesus Marmite? You put it on your Jesus toast. The key take-home point from this, of course, is that there is no face here at all. It's just how we perceive in the world and how we really do like to see these faces. By the way, this is such a big industry that if you do actually want to make Jesus toast, you can actually buy these things now called the Jesus toaster. They do even exist. Another example of faces being seen when they don't actually exist is quite a well-known one. This is a NASA photograph of the surface of Mars from the 1970s. And do many people see a face in that particular image? So we've got the eyes, the nose, and the mouth there. It was known as the face on Mars, to which I heard a great story saying that the Martians, ancient civilization, built a monument to us. They can see what we look like and they can be bothered to do that. Unfortunately, it was no such face. If we actually look at what it really looks like, that's actually the mountain range, as we can see it today. But we still have this kind of predisposition, if you like, to look and see faces even if they don't exist. We actually get a strange effect if I do one thing to that Martian photograph. And I'll just show it to you upside down. Now, because you've already seen the face last time round, you might still be able to pick it out there, but if you actually show that picture straight to people, they'll say, I can't see any face in that. And straight away, it kind of tells us there's something strange about face recognition, that we want to see things in a certain particular orientation. Another little clue to this, it may actually work this demonstration, I don't know, it may not. Depending on where you're looking, you might get it better from the left image or the right image. But you get a sort of a strange kind of blurred sensation like, oh my god, I've got seasick. Please get rid of that slide. It's as if the eyes are being your brain's trying to fuse those eyes together and fuse the mouth together. It's as if the brain knows what a face should actually look like. And this looks face-like, but it's not quite right. Something must be wrong with your vision, but it's not wrong with the picture. And it really does seem that what we like faces to look like are simple things like this. Although, maybe not this black, I think we get a little bit frightened if our face starts to look like this. But generally, we like the idea of two eyes above the central nose, above the central mouth. Actually, out of interest, these particular kinds of stimuli have been used with newborn infants. These babies are less than an hour old, and they can actually track stimuli that look like this, rather than stimuli that have actually got all the different elements scrambled up. It says that from a very early age, we've got something about this particular arrangement of features that we really quite like. So that's a little bit about how we might perceive faces in the sense that we really like to see them wherever they go, and it seems to be heavily due to the way that the features have actually been organised within the face. But there's another component to the session today, and that's about recognising people. I mentioned, would many people say they're really good with faces? Who's really bad? Oh, a few hands go up. Well, here's an example of something you probably all know from a variety of different images. All recognise them? It's all going to be images you'll see of Paul McCartney. And what's really quite remarkable about our ability in recognising Paul here is if we compare some of the images, we can see that his face has changed quite drastically. Probably wouldn't like to say that, but it has. And actually, the images that we look at of his face have changed quite a lot. So if we look at this image over here from his days in the Beatles, it looks quite dissimilar from this image up here of a much more recent image. Yet to us, we know Paul McCartney, it actually really looks like him. All of these images do. It's pretty remarkable that we can do such robust recognition across all these ages, across the different viewpoints we're seeing, different expressions, and so on. We have no difficulty identifying that that's Paul McCartney. To demonstrate also how good we can be with faces, the next slide may or may not work. It was actually a study conducted in the US with a particular face that's highly pertinent to Americans. It may work here, I'll give that a go. But can anybody ever guess who that is?
Abraham Lincoln.
It isn't Abraham Lincoln. It actually comes up. Here's some $5 bill. This is a paper that was published in 1973 demonstrating the least amount of information needed for the participants to actually be able to identify a famous person from a degraded stimulus. If you're further near the back and you can't quite see him, you could try screwing up your eyes a little bit. You might start being able to see the image come through. For those that have actually got no chance whatsoever with Lincoln because maybe you weren't around at the time that he was there, here's somebody who is a bit more current. You might be able to have a go with him. So if you've got Simon Cowell out of that, which people did. If you're doing better with Abraham Lincoln, good on you. But it does seem to be that with these people that we know, we do seem to have quite remarkable skill at recognising them. So how can we possibly go about that? How can we possibly recognise people like Lincoln, even though we've got such a great image? Well, if we take this one picture here that we have of Daniel Craig, which I'm sure everybody will recognise, what we can actually do to that one particular image is we can blur it. Now what we've done by blurring it is remove all the fine detail out of the image just to leave a general representation of his face. We still have no difficulty identifying that that is indeed Daniel Craig. And the reason we think we have no difficulty in identifying him is it's not so much these very, very fine points on his face that are really important for his recognition. It's actually the relationship between the features of his face. So earlier on I talked about the important thing to see in the face is we need two eyes, a central nose, and a centrally located mouth. In the case of identity, identifying a particular individual, what's really important is the particular distance between somebody's eyes, the particular distance between somebody's eyes and mouth, and so on. What's actually quite interesting is if you take faces like this and you just start shifting all the features around in the face, so they're still roughly the same location, but the spacing has been changed, it actually looks nothing like it. It's quite a remarkable effect. However, the brain's not that rigid. It can cope with a few more distortions. So you can actually start stretching out the face like so, and people still, again, reliably identify that as Daniel Craig. But the reason we think they're able to do that is the fact that the stretching is linear across the entire image. So his relationship's been changed in a linear fashion. He's still able to recover who it is. And just to throw it in, we can even blur the image as well. And people, again, have no real difficulty identifying him. The one thing we can do, though, is change the relationships without maintaining that linear relationship. And when we do, we get an image looking rather like this. Somebody described it to me earlier on as looking a bit like Mr. Spock or Leonard Nimoy. I think that's probably more looking like him than it does look like Daniel Craig. Even though it's identical to this image up here, I've just stretched the bottom half of his face. So something's changed in relation to the features, we start to perceive them slightly differently. That sort of demonstrates or suggests really that it's these relationships between these features that's of real importance, as opposed to the features themselves. But sometimes we can use the individual features to really powerful effect. So straight off, you'll know who this person is. Most people instantly recognise that as being Prince Charles. He doesn't have ears and nose like that. That's actually how his nose actually appears. So despite these gross changes in his appearance, we actually get better at recognising him here than we'll do with images like this. So it's not purely just the relationships between features. His known, the relationship between the features, it's his known features that become really important here, his nose and his ears. We can also make some other changes to his face, where we might actually just modify one of the features to a certain degree. And instead of getting something that's totally unrecognisable, what we actually see is something a little bit disturbing, frankly. So perhaps this image here, which I have to say is a toe, it's not anything else. See the toenail here, believe me, it's actually a toe. It's still clearly recognisable as him, but something is very, very wrong about his face. I think we probably all quite agree upon that. It seems to be that features have to still be in proportion. They cannot be ridiculously changed in real photographs, otherwise we start to see things a little bit crazy. But the reason I actually picked that one big example was actually the original slide that I had to demonstrate these things, which of course are caricatures. And that was this slide here, for people of a certain age, my age and probably older, remembers Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, the German scarf, caricatures in the opening credits of the show. So we have Paul Eddington, wasn't it, Nigel Hawthorne and Derek Falls were the three actors. Hackett, Humphrey and Bernard, I think that's what it was. But what's interesting about them is the noses are well out of proportion compared to the rest of the features. Some of the other features, for example, Nigel Hawthorne's eyes have been extremely exaggerated, but it's his nose that's gone through the biggest transformation. And if I go back to the Charles one, you can see it's the nose that's been attacked in these particular pictures as well. And what's of interest actually is the nose, out of all your features, is the one actually that's most useless for recognition. Much more about people's eyes and less so the mouth than we are about the noses. So, nearing the end of the bit that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to do a few demonstrations about how we can start to recognise people again, even though we've got very, very poor quality images available to us. Now, I have to say in advance that you won't actually recognise anybody in this footage. Well, at least I hope you don't recognise anybody in this footage. This actually was taken from a pub not too far from where I used to live up in my last job up in Hull. It's the End Light pub, and you're watching this guy up here. Now, this guy, he had gone to the pub about 15 minutes earlier, and he'd been kicked out because he lit up a cigarette. He came back with a chainsaw. And this is genuine CCTV footage of it, so he runs into the pub. There's a few people, what on earth's going on? Then they start getting the sense about what to do, chuck a chair at him. As you go through it, just think about how poor quality this image actually is, and this is directed safe from CCTV. Credit to this guy down here with the barrel. Just go straight after him. I mean, it's chucked all the way over here. He's not going to give up at this point. He's tumbling over with it. But the key thing is that it carries on from there. The key thing to take away from this is that one thing the CCTV told us is the course of events that actually took place. But if you actually look at the images that are available to us, they're really very, very low quality images. Yet you might be quite surprised to find that you can actually recognise people on this. If you think back to the days when Crime Watch started on TV, was it Nick Ross in the days to present that? Would be saying, have you seen this man? You know, these days they say, do you know this man? And that's an important point that I think later on Tim and I will happily discuss. But then there are some people that you will be able to recognise from CCTV footage. It has to be said, most celebrities don't like CCTV footage of themselves coming out because usually it's going to be for reasons that they don't want you to know about. So unfortunately I've only got one image that led to a bit of a major event. I imagine most people can recognise the individual presented in there as being Princess Diana. That was actually on that night. If I just blow up that portion of her face, you're doing that recognition of her just from that image. And it's pretty remarkable that we can actually do this. Sometimes, though, pure static images aren't enough. Studies have shown that some people can identify who that person is just by looking at the static image. However, there's a fair number of people that can't. When you actually play the video, though, many people say it starts to become much more obvious about who that individual actually is. It is indeed Margaret Thatcher. So it's not just going to be these orders of the features and so on, the relationships between the features. It's also going to be the way that people move as well. It's really important to be able to recognise people. It has to be said that doing research with people who are famous is really very difficult because people just look at static image and recognise them. Trying to get video is actually quite a tricky concept of the effect. To finish off with, really, there's examples here though where it does start to get a bit more tricky. So, does anybody have an idea who this is? A lot of people have great difficulty with that particular image. It's a photographic negative image, and the important thing to mention about photographic negative images is for colour images, it will reverse the brightness, if you like, of the image, and it will reverse the hue as well, which is why he comes out with sort of this bluish tinge, and with black teeth, not white teeth. What I can do is actually just reverse one of those. So I'll just reverse the brightness. What we get is an image you can hardly see over here. It's very, very dark indeed. And again, I imagine most people have great difficulty identifying who that is. However, if I just reverse just the hue and leave the brightness alone, suddenly it becomes really remarkably easy. And that's only one transformation, that's only one transformation. Yet that changing in the brightness has had a huge effect. And there's the unaltered image of Gary Lineker. So there are some limits to what we can actually do with familiar faces. By the way, it's on the left-hand side. When I showed it to somebody, they said, actually, isn't that Barry Chupper? Which I thought was quite interesting. If you want to identify people, pay attention to the context you find them in. This is a well-known image of Clinton and Gore, except it's not an image of Clinton and Gore. It's actually a picture of Bill Clinton and his facial features, and Al Gore's body and outer head shape, and Bill Clinton's inner features. So it's actually the inner features being copied off of Bill Clinton and put onto Gore. Yet at first glance it immediately comes across as that's indeed Al Gore in the background. So context as well can have a huge effect. So if you know anybody who likes going to parts with chainsaws, then you might actually look at pride. So that's it was. And the final thing I'm going to finish off with, the final slide, is just a task that I know Tim's going to be getting to do a little later on, where I've got different faces. This is a guy up here who I believe the Melbourne police are looking for him. Apparently was speeding last Sunday afternoon in Melbourne Park. He protested his innocence and said his car was known and they fast enough to do that. The question is, can you tell if he's in that set down there? Now what's interesting about this particular task is I suspect there may be one or two people who did that absolutely instantly. Some people might be, oh, I think it's that one, and some people might have completely no idea. For particular reasons, we'll leave on till after the talk. I'm not going to give you the answer just yet, except to say thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Tim.
Right, well, thank you, Chris, very much. I think Chris has taught us a lot about how we receive faces, and also given us the view that we're not too bad at recognising faces, particularly when they're famous faces. Now I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's going to present a different viewpoint. He's going to suggest that perhaps we're not quite as good at recognising faces as Chris was suggesting. Tim, over to you.
Thanks very much. We've been, those of us who are slightly older than perhaps the average age, we've been living through a natural experiment in justice. And I want to try and talk you through this experiment that's been occurring, and mostly these figures have come from America, but the same has been happening in the UK. We're going to talk you through these numbers, just to tell you what's been happening. So in 1984, what happened? DNA testing was invented. So the procedure by which people could be identified from their DNA was first developed in 1984. That is remarkably recent. And the first successful prosecution based on DNA evidence took place in 1987. So, application of basic science into transforming our lives. We all think DNA testing has been around forever. 1989 was the first case being overturned by DNA evidence, where an innocent person was released on the basis that the DNA collected at the time from the crime scene was someone else. And in 2013, in March, when I looked in America on the Innocence Project website, there are now 303 cases where there has been DNA evidence used to overturn convictions. That's 303 innocent people have been released. On average, those people spent 13.6 years in jail, 18 of them on death row. Why? Why were they there? Well, the answer, because people have looked very carefully, the answer is, sadly, that in 72% of the cases, the error could be traced back to a poor eyewitness identification. In some cases, multiple identifications. 72%. That's terrible, you might think. We ought to do something about it. We've known this for a very long time. There was a review in 1988 of all the cases in the UK that were overturned. What was the cause of those wrongful convictions, as they were known? In 75% of cases, it was misidentification. Misidentification results in innocent people going to jail. It results in the guilty going free and justice not being served. But Tim, 303 people is not so bad. Well, these are the cases we know about. These are the cases for which there was DNA. These are the cases for which lawyers were hired and successfully lobbied for that DNA evidence to be reopened. In the majority, overwhelming majority of cases, there is no DNA evidence used. How big a problem could it be? Well, I'm going to scare you now. In the UK, there's about 89,000 people in prison. And in the USA, where most of this research is done, there are 2,193,000. I won't swear by the last 3 digits. There are a lot of people in jail. How good do you think our justice system is? Let's assume for a moment it's 99% accurate. That is, of all the people in jail, 99% are really guilty. That leaves 1% innocent. That's 22,000 people in America who are currently in jail who are innocent. And in the UK, that's 890. And that's it. 99% is the right number. We don't know. And if you think that eyewitness error is responsible in about 3/4 of the cases, that's, in America, about 16,000 people who've been put in jail who are innocent because of poor eyewitnesses. That's quite startling, isn't it? And think about how many of those might be on death row. Well, fortunately, this DNA evidence is having a huge impact. There was a review brought forward by Janet Reno in the late 90s to look at the causes, because, of course, there was a great public outcry when these cases came to light. What caused it? And so there have been reviews of policy and procedure. And in many states, many governors have repealed the death penalty. What I want to do in the time I have with you is talk how this happens. How does it get to be the case that we have so many people in prison who are innocent? I'll tell you in 5 steps. Step 1. Right, let's hope this works. I'd like you to watch this video carefully. If I can go to plan.
You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay, now, did you happen to notice anything odd? Watch again. See changes? Don't worry if you can't see that it's 2 different men. It means your brain is doing exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the scene rather than on the irrelevant details.
Okay, honesty time. How many people noticed it was a different man? And how many didn't? In a lecture on face recognition. Okay. So, under the instruction to watch carefully, you notice after about 2 seconds that the guy changed. And he changed his shirt. So, we don't pay an enormous amount of attention to people's identity. We don't need to. Most of the time we're in a crowd. We don't need to know who everybody is. They're just a crowd. They're people. They could be the same. They are the same. They're just people. We don't need to disambiguate them. If we had to try and work out the identity of every face we encountered, we'd need such huge brain power we wouldn't be able to lift our heads. And so we use cognitive shortcuts. We mostly just classify people as people. Occasionally you see someone, you know they pop out. But for the majority of people, we don't treat them like that. So, why does it happen? Step 1, we don't take the identity of strangers as being that important. Of course, sometimes it is important. Sometimes we do want to explicitly try and compare. So let's have a look at step 2. Let's imagine now you are working in customs control. You're worried about some dodgy characters coming through customs. Can you tell me? Does this person match their photo ID? So, step 2. Are these people the same people or different people? It's not a memory test. I'm not going to take them away. I'm just going to show you some pictures and ask you, are they the same? So these 2 pictures of the same woman or of different women. Anyone prepared to vote? Who thinks it's the same woman? And who thinks it's a different woman? Okay, thank you. So you stopped her at customs control? Okay, this woman, or women rather, this slide, these two women, are they the same or different? Who thinks they're the same? Who thinks they're different? Now these two women. Who thinks these are the same? Who thinks they're different? Who thinks they're the same? And who thinks they're different? Now I'm going to tell you they're all the same. These women are all Cindy Sherman, who's an artist who does self-portraits. You can Google her and get these images. They're all the same woman. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Are these the same people or are they different people? Is this one easy? Yeah. But unfortunately, the gentleman on the right is the man who was shot in the tube station, being confused with the one on the left. And many people rush to condemn the police for the obvious distinction between them, but it's actually a very difficult task. And that's because different faces look like one another, and the same face can look very different from itself on another occasion. People can grow their hair, they can grow a beard, they can wear a hat, they can be crying one day and smiling another, they can be in different lighting. All sorts of things can make the same look different and the different look the same. Step 3. You're all given a little sheet before you came in. Who's got that sheet with them? Who's got a white sheet? Can you hand up that white sheet with many faces on? Super. And you've got a pink sheet. Great. And a blue sheet. Super. You've all been studying that, I hope. But who gave you that sheet? I know who you met because you just showed me. I'm going to show you a lineup. I have reason to suspect that these people have been handing out dodgy quizzes and they've been called to the police station with constructed the following lineups. Those of you in the white sheets, don't start shoving them in your pockets and pretend you haven't got one. I specifically asked the very kind student volunteers who helped me, I specifically asked them to look you in the eye and speak to you. So you met them. So those who got the white sheet, could you please try and identify the person you saw from the following lineup? The options are those 6 names there, or it could be none of them. White sheet group. Who thinks is number 1? I'll go through this quickly. Number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Super. Sorry, and none of them? Okay. And no one escapes. Pink group. Who thinks it's... So again, those in the pink group, who thinks it's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and last blue group. 1, sorry, I'll give you time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, none of them. Okay. Now I'll tell you the real answers. Most of you, the majority was number 3. Thank you very much those who picked Sean. But number 7 was the right answer for the second lineup, and I saw a lot of hands go up. Who put a hand up in the blue group? Come on, I saw more hands than that. Yeah. And who put their hand up in the, in this group, blue group? The right answer was none. What you've just done is demonstrate what happens is that people like to pick. Witnesses like to try and find the best match. But the best match might not be the person who did the crime. Imagine you're an innocent person. You were not handing out these dodgy quizzes. you find yourself in the lineup, there's a good chance you'll be picked. And if you're picked, you're down the slippery slope. So, you initially picked, you maybe weren't so sure, but you picked. Now you're a very useful witness to the police, you've identified the suspect, you weren't very sure, but you get told by the police, well done. You picked the suspect. They might not explicitly tell you it right then, but you'll soon get the call back, trial's coming up, you're going to be in court. You don't get that call if you pick the wrong person. Before you go to court, you know you picked the right person. So I'm going to show you one study, the results of one study, that looked at what's the effect of being told you got the right person. In this study, there are 140 participants, and 140 participants picked the wrong person. The right person was never there, everybody picked, but they were told they were right. That's the experimental group. And the control group were told nothing. And then they were asked, how confident were you? Well, the control group were medium confident. How good a look did you get when you first saw them? Well, reasonable, and so on. But what about the group who were told they got the right guy? They were all sure they were right. They were wrong. They say they had a better look at the original event. They got the wrong person. They said they had more of a chance to pick out the details of his face. They got the wrong person. They said it would have been easy to pick. They got the wrong person. And they were more willing to go to court and testify. So step 4 is, the witness who's really not sure becomes sure, and they're sure about everything. And so, step 5, when the jurors hear this person, they believe them. This isn't hypothetical stuff, this is real stuff. I'll finish with the case of Ronald Pop. This is a remarkable story, and I urge you to maybe go home and Google the name Ronald Pop. If you think I'm not going to remember that name, I'll give you a little memory aid in a minute. So Jennifer Thompson, the lady on the right of that picture, was attacked in 1984. She was raped as a student, and she went to give her account to the police, and the police had some suspects that they had on their books, and they put a series of photographs in front of her, and she identified Ronald Cotton as her assailant. She reported at the time of her attack that she made every effort to pick out all the details of his face because she wanted to make sure he was prosecuted. He was subsequently put in the lineup and she identified him. It took her 2 minutes. And she had some difficulty in deciding between Ronald Cotton and one another. But by the time she got to court, she was absolutely convinced that he was the right guy. He was convicted on her evidence and spent 10 or 11 years in jail before he was exonerated with DNA evidence. The right man was Bobby Poole, who in the 11 years went on to rape other women and make other attacks on burglaries. So there's not just one victim or even 2 victims, there are multiple victims to a case like this. The remarkable thing about this, these 2 people are now best friends. Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson have written a book, and this is the memory aid you need. What's it called? Picking Cotton. And they now tour America, campaigning for revised practice in legal procedures. So, it's not so clear we have a great face recognition. I don't agree with Chris, although you do agree with it. I'll leave it there. If anyone's interested in the answers to the quiz, I'll save those till later. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. I think that's very worrying information. And now I'd like to open the proceedings to the audience. We have a roving... we don't have it. Okay, I'm going to give it to you.
There we go. Brilliant. We have a roving mic.
Okay, so if you would like to make a point, you'd like to ask a question, you'd like to object to anything that any of the speakers have said, I know it's not so easy to talk in this lecture theatre compared with the Roland Levitsky exhibition space we've been before. But please be brave. It really isn't very bad to, and we'll have a microphone, so come on, who's going to start it off? Let's have somebody raise a hand. Someone, oh, excellent. Now you see, once we start, we're making well done. And this is going to be Lucy, she's going to get very much fitter.
Could the difference between, let's say, good recognition and poor recognition be just a question of familiarity? Because the first talk is mostly familiar faces. Obviously, they need to have the good features, but it's familiar faces. And for the other one, it's just something that we see in passing. So that's maybe what we're bad.
Okay, I'm going to ask both our contributors to answer this. So the question is it a matter of familiarity which determines whether we are good at recognising faces or not? Let's start off with Chris.
Yes. When Tim and I first discussed about doing this, I remember thinking to myself, when I was thinking about what's going to be presenting, about how good we can be with faces, is how am I going to give the talk without ever trying to use the word familiar? To try and leave that out of that. Because I was trying to get across really just how good we can be with faces. And that's the crucial thing. With unfamiliar face recognition, I totally agree with Tim, it is pretty bad.
Yeah, you won't get me to disagree, but I think there's an extra dimension to this. When you ask people, are you good at faces or good at names? People say, I'm good at faces. Why do jurors believe witnesses? Because people think we're good at faces. So people's experience of face recognition is judged on familiar face recognition. I'm able to recognise lots of people I know, and ergo, I'm good at face recognition. And then they think it generalises, but it doesn't. So I think that's the extra dimension. I think the other point I would make is that our way of interacting with each other reinforces the belief that we're good at faces. I'm now going to do a little bit of acting that I do in my third year option to make this point. So, imagine, Chris, would you be my volunteer? He has no idea what I'm going to do now. Chris, you're one of my undergraduates in my course. You're walking towards me, I'm walking towards you. So what's just happened? I failed to recognise him. Did I learn that? No. He's too polite to say, "Oi, you're supposed to recognise me." So I just convinced myself once again I was right in my first case. I'm going to try another one this time. You're another undergraduate. You're not one of my undergraduates this time. You're just an undergraduate. Do I know yourself? Fine.
Okay.
So what did I just learn? That I recognise this person, and how do I know I was right? Because they said hello back. But he doesn't know me. I was wrong, but we don't get the feedback. So the way we work in society is we give each other feedback that we're good, and we know with familiar faces we're good, and we mistake that for the generalisation that we're good at faces, and that's not true.
Thank you. We have another question over here. Yes?
Okay, I'll be back.
So we've got one coming back. Okay, that's excellent.
Could you tell us, does the context actually put us under pressure to identify?
Right. Does the context matter? Does it put us under pressure? Let's start with Tim on that, and then we'll do Chris.
And you talk about the police context.
Well, yes, any context, really.
There's two meanings of the word context. So first of all, there's the context in which you usually encounter people. So it's certainly the case that if you are used to meeting certain people in a certain environment, you are already geared up to recognising the Christian. Made that one. So I'm more likely to recognise Chris in the corridor of our department than I am walking about. If I was hill walking in Cumbria, I would. The other meaning I think you implied is that when a witness is there in the police station trying to make an identification, I think certainly that there's a belief that the police don't just put people in the lineup willy-nilly. Therefore, it's not the task to reject everyone, but the task is to try and pick out the one that the police think. So yes, I think the police try and overcome that by having an officer run those identifications who is blind to the actual identity of the person, but nevertheless the setting, and also the personal context of wanting justice. I think that does put pressure on people to pick.
think also something else to say on context also is that if we think about how somebody actually appears to us, basically the look that they have, people can be very, very consistent, this is across different people, can be very consistent at identifying personality traits, whether they're true or not. So we might have somebody who may be saying, well, does that person look untrustworthy? A large number of people will actually agree on saying that person is indeed untrustworthy, and so on. So you do get this sort of social context effects as well, just on how they actually appear. And also, just carrying on with what Tim was saying, I actually have a real life story actually from the context of where you actually meet people from. A friend of mine was telling me about a story that he went to Australia and went into the, whatever the W. Smith equivalent is in Sydney Airport. And there was a guy who served him. He says, "Right, Scott, how are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh my God, I used to work with you." And it's a bit the case like, I don't know how on earth he managed to recognise this friend of mine who just arrived in Sydney, but just seeing this other guy in his airport was like, I didn't expect to see him again at all. And it's a really, really powerful effect that makes you doubt, really, that you are indeed identifying the right individual, just by virtue of life. I've never seen them here. But very true.
One yes, please, thank you.
Yes, I was just wondering if there was any correlation between age or gender or culture given to people's ability to recognise faces or not.
We'll start off with questions, right?
Got a bit of bad news for many people, and that is that our ability to recognise faces actually decreases as we get older. So the older you get, the more faces you've seen, you might actually think it would be slightly better, but actually our performance does tail off quite drastically as we reach into our 70s or so. In terms of gender, there's no real major evidence. I'm sort of dilly-dallying a bit because there is something called the own-sex bias, where basically people are better at recognising faces of their own sex. And hand in that is that some papers have found that females are actually better overall with faces than men. But this effect, just in my experience of trying to replicate that kind of effect, is actually proved to be quite difficult to do. Either getting women being better with women's faces and men being better with men's faces, or females being better overall. It does seem to be pretty much largely the same, no major differences there. In terms of race, though, we do also have another pertinent effect, probably to something that I imagine Tim will carry on about, which is the other race effect, which is basically where we become very, very good at processing faces of the race of which we've got the most experience of. So most people in this room would have grown up in Western Europe and the UK, and we're very good at processing Caucasian faces. If we present you with a list of Asian faces or black African faces, people's performance gets really quite poor in doing those tasks. Conversely, if you give somebody from China, for example, a load of Chinese faces, they can do the task without too much difficulty, within the limits of what Tim and I were talking about, but give them a list of Caucasian faces and they'll really, really struggle in that sense. In terms of general differences between the cultures, the only thing we're starting to see slightly is that, in particular in Japan, where we've done a lot of these kind of cross-race experiments, a lot of Japanese are getting very exposed to Caucasian faces thanks to things like Hollywood. So it's starting to change things slightly, that the Japanese aren't as bad as they used to be with this, whereas we Caucasians, we're not improving.
No, I haven't got. What Chris has said is by and large true. There is a slight evidence for an age bias. We could spend some time talking about why these biases occur, but one of the reasons they occur of all groups is that we have a tendency to classify people. So if this is another experiment I used to do with my undergraduates, you put out the window and say, what's that person like? If they're old, the first thing the young person will say is, that's an old person. And that's as far as they need to go. Whereas to another old person, they're a friend, they're a colleague, they're a whatever. So we tend to have our group of in-group, we spend a lot of time devoted to distinguishing between them, and those in another group, they're just that other group, and we don't actually trouble ourselves to go beyond what I said, they're just other people.
Good. And we have one question, we have two questions, we've got three questions, okay. We've got four questions, okay. There, and then, okay. So Lucy, the next one will be down the front, and then we'll work your way back. Okay, thank you.
Chris, I wanted to ask a very general question about human faces.
Yes.
And whether human faces are special. You mentioned in your talk, you mentioned livestock.
Yeah.
I know there's some work on farmers and their recognition of sheep.
Yes.
Are sheep the same as humans in terms of recognition of faces? When you're familiar with
It's, I mean, just to elaborate on the piece that Simon was talking about, there's a famous case of a sheep farmer who became prosopagnosia. For those who have not heard the term prosopagnosia or prosopagnosia before, this is a profound impairment in facial recognition ability. So this farmer couldn't recognise his wife, for example. But what he could actually do was identify his sheep. So he was able to pick out which one was, whitey from blackie from purpley, whatever it might have been in terms of his names. In terms of actual processing and expertise, if you like, with other animals, so to speak, there's some very interesting research done in infancy that 6-month-old infants can be shown pictures of monkey faces, I think they're macaques, I think they were, and human faces. And at 6 months of age, they could actually learn these two, within these groups, they could learn which monkey faces they'd seen and which human faces they'd seen. And they're actually able to identify using, obviously not going to ask a 6-month-old which one you've seen before, they do have techniques for it, and they're able to actually indicate which faces they had seen, whether they were monkey or whether they were human. So as we're growing up through the first 6 months of our life, we do have this ability to be just as good with other, what we call the other species effect, with other species as well as we are with human faces. What's interesting is that by the time you get to about 9 months of age, that ability to deal with the monkey faces has gone. Through those extra 3 months, we've become really tuned now to human faces, and that's what we tend to process all the time. We don't tend to process any monkey faces at home, not speaking about any parents in the room. Because of this contact that we have with these human faces, we lose this fine ability to discriminate between the monkey faces. What is interesting as well is, it's not totally to do with other animals, but the other race effect, which I briefly mentioned earlier on, there's been a study that's been going through the process. I don't know if you or whether it's actually been published, it's one of the two, that was basically looking at whether if infants, after about 6 months, are given a daily task of looking at Chinese faces, and I should say these are Caucasian participants in the UK, and they're given a daily task of looking at Chinese faces, this other race effect, where they become to get quite poor at processing the Chinese faces, is actually delayed. So they don't actually start to show the same kind of imbalance, if you like, in performance between Caucasian and Asian faces by the time they get to 9 months of age. I'll finish off the question with one final undergraduate project. Because undergraduate projects can sometimes be great for doing some of the more, shall I say, wacky things. And this student I had wants to know, if people are an expert in horses, would you get the same kind of effects you get in human faces? I won't go into the detail to explain the whole task, because it's a little bit different, involving a slightly different procedure and a different kind of stimulus, but at the end of the day, horse riders actually showed the same kind of effect as non-horse riders did for human faces, as well as obviously showed for human faces and clouds, but the non-horse riders, no effect for horses whatsoever.
And we've got one down here, and then we'll give it work backwards. That's great. Thank you.
I'm forever asking the so what question, and so what I'd like to ask, I've never done jury service, and I've just quickly Googled what preparation one might get if one was called, so forgive my ignorance if more does happen than if on Google. But I just wondered, I've just seen this, and it's immediately made me, it's fundamentally made me doubt my own perception, and I just wonder how powerful that would be if a jury did know how fallible they were.
Well, I think I'm asking Tim to do something.
It's a very good question. I think psychological research, like we've been talking about today, have two impacts. And I think the first is more helpful than the second. So the first impact that you can have is on procedural evidence gathering. How should we run a lineup? How should we interview people? What instructions should we give? Those kind of things. And that has already impacted on police practice, so that the innocent are less likely to end up in court. The other kind of way that psychological evidence is used, which is less used in this country and more used in America, is for psychologists to go in court and try and explain psychological procedures to jurors. The so what question for the jury. The difficulty there is that what the outcome tends to be is it makes jurors more cautious. Now that would be a good thing if the person is innocent, and a bad thing if they're guilty. Better to try and avoid putting the innocent on trial by having better procedures. So I think the research has value before it gets to the jurors. I mean, explaining the procedures to the jurors and then expecting them to extrapolate from the general research to this specific case, that's difficult. Because of course, The research is probabilistic, it's based on group samples, it has a significant, there's an effect size. It's very hard to know. In this case, with this witness who says they saw that man, it's very hard to say. I think a little bit of scepticism is healthy, but I think we've got to be wary of simply, saying everyone's innocent.
So will I get called out?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I hope I get called out.
I hope the evidence is better than just an eyewitness, but it has to be now.
Well, literally, I thought it was a very good time actually to chip in something to follow on what Tim's been talking about, is that all the issues that Tim's been raised, unfortunately, are not new issues. The report I'm actually thinking of, Tim probably can say more about than I can, is the Devlin report, or Patrick Devlin of 1976. You don't know that one, right?
No, that's
Basically, it was a report that was commissioned because there was a number of cases where it was clear that he had miscarriage of justice, and dating in the 50s and 60s. And these cases, these men had been put away purely on the basis of eyewitness testimony. So Devlin in 76 published his report suggesting that we really should not rely purely upon...
You can't
in the UK we can't do that anymore. And I think in 76, that's the first time I've seen it mentioned in a legal kind of precedent.
Thank you very much. That's all very, very helpful.
Right, can we go back to the Paul McCartney bit? Because I'd like to query that we only recognise him because he's grown with us through the years.
Yes. Well, I actually have a picture up, or...
Sorry?
Oh, just a question. I have to put the picture up as well. Or...
No, don't have it.
Oh, right.
But if you say that was Paul McCartney's uncle,
yes.
we wouldn't have recognised him. We would have said, well, some of those are the same, and some are different people.
Yeah. So I think the thing with that is that people have been exposed to Paul McCartney through one medium or another, be it from TV footage or just in newspapers and so on. Through most of his career, most people have been exposed to this kind of thing. I mean, the important thing I have to point out is that these are, the stuff I was talking about is familiar face recognition, and of course there's no guarantee that he's going to be familiar to absolutely every single person in the entire room. So there will be some potential gaps can occur in there. So, I mean, most people usually will be able to say that they do recognise most of those images. The ones actually that people tend to struggle a little bit with are things that they're not, times where he's not going to be in the forefront. So, for example, in the 1980s as well, when obviously big in the Beatles times, in recent times, divorce cases and so forth have been in the media quite a bit. But in that middle sort of period, he wasn't in the news so much. So sometimes people struggle with those sorts of photographs of him. But there does seem to be an ability to generalise from one age to another age within certain limits. Generally, we tend to find it can be up to about 20 years or so. There's a very nice study that was done in the early 1990s, and it was done on American or ex-American high school students who had graduated 25 years earlier. And they were basically shown photographs of from their yearbook and a load of current photographs of older people who were 25 years older than that. What they actually found there is that the people who actually went to that high school could very accurately say, oh, that's David, that's Bill, that's Bob, or whatever, and do this matching task. Give the same sort of tasks to people who did not know anybody, who did not go to that high school, did not know those people, couldn't do the task at all. So it does seem to be that as we become familiar with people, one of the things we do gain is an ability to mentally process these faces across different ages as well, not just at a single age we actually know those people. That said, it's probably going to be quite amount of individual variation in that as well. Some people do struggle with that a bit more than others, and that's a whole other sort of area where there's a lot of variability in how people process faces anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we've got one further back, is that right? Yes, we've got one in the front. Sorry, yes.
Do you know why some people are better at recognising faces than other people?
Okay, I'm going to ask this first to Tim. This is why some people are better than others.
I don't think we know why they're better. We know that they are better. I think there are two elements to it. There is a natural ability, how much of your brain power is devoted to the task of recognising faces. And there's also interest. Interest in intersocial situations. Are you interested in other people enough to care enough to process other people? We certainly know that there are groups of people with very poor face recognition. We talked about prosopagnosia. We know it's not just a problem that comes after an injury or an illness. It can be developmental. People are chronically, since birth, unable to recognise others. I was talking to someone in a reception about they claim their father as prosopagnotic. Their father doesn't recognise them. And we also know that there are, quote, super recognisers who are remarkably adept at recognising faces. Like all human abilities, there's great variance. But it is a fairly reliable human ability.
Yeah, I think actually the point that Tim made about super recognisers, this is a real hot topic right now. Actually, to find people that we think are prosopagnotic, which is really arbitrary figure based on, let's say, the bottom 2% of the population, to find them is actually quite easy to do. Find the people at the very, very top that are exceptionally good. They're so few and far between, there's very, very few studies ever been published and looked into this. As soon as we actually able to find these people, then we can start trying to find out what it is that they're so good at. At the moment, we don't really know so much on that.
Thank you very much. We have one question over here.
There was a study, I believe, on sheep being able to recognise the faces of other sheep from a flock. I don't remember the exact details. I know they did have pictures and they changed it was black and white and so on. But I wondered if you knew of any other studies in animals where they've actually tested face recognition and what you would think about trying it in macaques with other macaques rather than babies trying to learn to recognise macaques.
That is an interesting question.
This is pushing my memory quite a bit here. So I'm pretty sure somebody has attempted to do this with actually with monkeys to see, if there are essentially problems. If you want to actually look at the brain itself and you want to see actually which neurons are firing when it shows certain faces, we can't do that to the typical undergraduate. We can't do it to their heads and electrode in, unfortunately. So people who tend to use things like cat monkeys, and what we are finding is certain neurons actually are firing when they're seeing certain monkey faces in certain viewpoints. So there is little bits of evidence on that.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, we have one. We have two, almost very close behind you.
First of all, do the police still use the identified system of getting witnesses to identify people in crime? How accurate is it?
They use a more modern derivative of identikit. There are various systems in use. They're called Profit, eFit, and EvoFit. There are various now more sophisticated computer software packages used to generate images of people you've seen. How good are they? It depends on the measure that you're trying to use. They're not good at producing an image that someone else will instantly look at and say, that's X. As Chris said in his introduction, what they are good at is if you know the person, then you may well go, oh, that looks a bit like Bob from down the street. Okay? So you won't see a photo fit image or a profile image and think, that's a man I saw down the street last week. But you know them already, you may see a resemblance. And so what the police rely upon is a large population seeing these images and 2 or 3 people saying, that might be Bob. Yeah? So the actual success rate is minuscule. It's 1 in 1,000 people might recognise it, but that's all they want. They want the lead. So that's what they're used for.
And just to follow up on that the classic identikit is where basically people go through and look at separate parts of the face and say, well, that's his eyes, that's his hairstyle, and put that all together. When I was talking a little bit about how we process the familiar faces, we pay a lot of attention to the sort of global aspect of the face, like the spacing between the features, difference between the eyes and so forth. And some of the more successful, still very low success rate, but some of the more successful recent systems actually are taking into account that, okay, we've got these features that people are identifying, but if we take into account the global sort of perception that we have of the face, we start to get slightly better hit rates out of that by taking those sort of things into account.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have another question.
I just wanted to ask about 2 cases that you cited previously, Ronald Pop and Charles Manus. And I was just wondering if you think that those 2 types of identification errors are the same, in the sense that I suppose that the police officers who actually who did shoot Charles Manus incorrectly they may have been familiar with him in the sense that they were doing a lot of planning, they were seeing maybe pictures of him, and so there was errors in maybe tracking of the wrong suspect, but it was basically having to identify a subject at the time during the incident, as opposed to in the Ronald Pop case where it was a sort of a post-incident sort of recollection and trying to...
I can see where you're heading. I mean, what happened with the Menezes case was that they weren't looking for him, they were looking for Hussein, wasn't Hussein. So they were very familiar with that face, and then what happened is they thought they recognised him, so it was a false positive match. So in that sense, it was rather like the Thompson case. There was a false positive, so she took a lot of effort in trying to identify her attacker, but later found a false match when there shouldn't be. Now, there are many differences. The police were operating in a busy environment, they were tracking, as you say, there was lots of radio messaging going back and forwards, but he was on the move, they were trying to track him now. There are lots of differences, but I think the fundamental error is perhaps the same. They're looking for face A, they see a match in face B where it's perhaps not as good a match as it ought to be.
I think it's also worth mentioning something you highlighted there. It's a very good point about the police had access to photographs, for example. In research we've been doing for quite a few years now, when we try and train people to learn faces, learn individuals from the photograph, what we actually tend to find is they just learn the photograph. They don't actually learn something much more general about the face. So they might have all the photographs in the world, still might not help them when they're actually out there for everyone, so to speak.
Now we have time for just one more question. If there's one more question. Maybe one more question. Well, no, in which case, Tim is going to give the answer to his quiz, which is...
Now, I was rather cruel to you earlier. I gave you the white, pink and blue things, but I know that many of you were puzzling over these faces and were they the same or different, and I promised several people I'd give you the answers. I'll tell you before we reveal, though, how many people spotted a match? How many people spotted more than one match? How many people have found 3 people the same? Well done. How many people have found 2 people that were there 3 times? Well done. We might have found some super rare ones. Here are the right answers, colour-coded. So, and this sort of relates to the last question. Actually, it's very difficult to match photos of the same person. This gentleman here is this gentleman here, is that gentleman at the top. This lady here, we've seen her already, is this lady here, and is not J.K. Rowling. That's a young Lloyd Cole, and this gentleman in blue is an old Lloyd Cole. Very easy for me, I picked my 80s pop stars. Those of you who didn't grow up liking indie pop in the 80s may have found it more challenging. Thank you very much.
Well, we've had an absolutely fascinating evening. I think we've learned an awful lot about human memory. We've also learned an awful lot about the legal system. So I'd just like to show of hands. How many people here feel more concerned now than they did before about the justice which is meted out on the basis of eyewitness testimony? Who's slightly more worried? A lot of people are more worried. And I'm certainly more worried. I've learned that as I get older, my ability to recognise faces is going to go down. I've noticed this already. One of the problems with being a lecturer, and lecturing for many years, is you see, you're just sitting here, and there's a whole sea of students. So when I walk around the campus, I never know whether they know me or not, and I always smile at everyone. I always have a name grin. So if you see me downtown, because now I see many people from the community coming to these talks, and I just don't know who knows me, who doesn't. So I smile at everyone. All I can say is a very big thank you to our 2 speakers, and a big thank you to our audience. You're wonderful contribution. Thank you very much.